Hey everyone, Nils here from Dingy. Today I want to talk to you about optimizing SVGs and how to get them into a website. I know this is a topic that's been talked about before, but I have a pretty complex SVG graphic today that involves blurs, gradients on a border, and curved lines, and I want to turn it into an animation. After this video today, you should be able to receive like a bigger, more complex SVG from your designers, for example, or get it from somewhere and turn it into something that can be really well used into your website. So we'll look at how to export it from Figma, how to optimize it before doing that on Figma, and how to name stuff, what to look out for, these sort of things. Then I'll show you some tools to automatically optimize the SVG code a little bit more, just to have less clutter to look at. Like Figma is already pretty good at exporting, but we can make it a little bit better even. Then we'll jump into the code and we'll look at the SVG, how it comes out in the browser just after the export process, and we'll point out a couple of the issues that we'll have, because we have like two conflicting techniques that we're trying to apply where we need to find creative solutions too, and that is background blur, and that is rounded borders with a gradient on them. You'll see what I mean in a minute. On top of all of this, we want to turn this SVG graphic into a little bit of a parallax animation, just very slightly, and we'll get to all of that in this video. Here we are in our website's design. This is the design file that I received from our designer, and let's look at what we have here. Let's dive right in. So I'm currently working on the About Us page, and I'm interested in this graphic here. That's the one we're talking about. That's what we're working with. All right, so beautiful graphic. You can already see and maybe recognize a couple of the difficult parts that we're looking to also get on the web. And those are, so for example, here's a couple circles stacked on top of each other. And you can see that each of them have a blur effect applied. So if we look at this in the side panel, then we can see that we have the background blur going on here. If we turn that off, then you can see that the background, the line in the background is shining through just clearly. And this way, the blur effect is stacking. It's becoming even more blurry with every layer stacked on top of each other. All right, that's one thing. Then also on these circles, you can see that here we have a stroke applied with a linear gradient. So if you look at this, then in Figma, you can do this. You can change how the gradient appears on a path. And that is also going to be a little bit tricky. So, and then let's look at the other elements. So we have that repeating in the design as a design element. So also here on these text labels, first of all, we have text, also interesting because we have two different options in SVG. You can, of course, outline the text as if you were doing it here. So if you hit flatten, then this text is not editable anymore, but it's turned into a path. That's not good for search engines, because search engines, if you leave the text as regular text in the SVG, search engines can look through SVGs as well and pick up text there. So ideally, we don't outline the text in here. All right, so, and then similar as on the green circle, we have the blurry background on this box, and we also have the linear gradient going on, only that it's in a different direction, right? Like it goes from top to bottom here, but the effect is similar. And then we have like these little circles representing a location. And they also have the background blur going on. All right. So, and then to sneak peek into the future of this video, we have these little dots going on here. And since they have a different size, I would love to strengthen the effect of the depth of field here and have them move with your scroll, but at different speeds. So it looks like there's a little bit of a 3D effect applied on here. And since we also have these arcing connection lines going on here, I think it would look pretty cool as soon as this graphic comes into the viewport. It would be nice if those lines could animate themselves. And that's an effect many of you already know that this is doable with dash array and dash offset, but I'm going to show you like a little tiny trick that I think not many people know about yet, and that makes your life so much easier with these sorts of animations. All right, let's look at this SVG. Let's optimize this a little bit in Figma, and then let's look at it in the browser to see what's going wrong and where our job begins today. All right, let's get to it. Cool. So anyone who has ever received an SVG graphic or a design in general probably has seen something like this before. So if we zoom out a little bit, so first of all, the first thing I always do when I get something like this, then I don't start to kerfuzzle around with the graphic right here in the design because I don't want to break the original state that I got it in. So I'll just make a copy and make like a new design file so we can just work on the graphic. So that's that. So we can just to make sure we can close down our branding file here. All right. And so here we have our map. And if we open this frame, we can already see the rough structure of this, right? So usually, of course, layers are not named. And also, I really don't want to blame anyone here because usually, why would you name like every individual connection line over here? You know, it doesn't really help you with anything, except for, in our case, if you want to do something with those things. So in our case, we might actually want to take like a little bit of a closer look on how this stuff is named. But I would suggest that first of all, we just take this graphic as is, and we look at a couple different options that you have to export that graphic on Figma. To export this, if this is not already pre-configured by the designer, then it looks like this. Then the export option is just, there's nothing, and you can add like a new export. So in this case, the default is a PNG. We're going to change this over to an SVG. And then in the little 3-dot menu on the side, there's not many options, but very important ones. And these are include the ID attribute, and we want to untick the outline text option right here. Now you can hit export map here and export it as a file regularly, but I wanted to also point out, because I just found that out today, that if you change the export options over here and then just right click on your frame, go to copy paste as, and then you can say copy as SVG. Then this option will also include the configurations that you made in the export panel. So this is what I'm going to do. It says copied as SVG. And now let's go and bring this into our website. I have this prepared here already. So the SVG that I pasted into my code editor here, this is really just what we're getting out of Figma. And you can already see, right? Like we have IDs with spaces in here now, and we have weird names that nobody can understand, and like all of this sort of stuff that you expect from an automatic export. And that's fine. But so I would say, first of all, let's look at how this comes out in the browser right away. So here we have the graphic in our website, and it doesn't look all too bad, I would say. Most of the graphic on, like, I would say it's the first impression, this looks pretty much like the graphic that we saw in Figma, and that's fine. But if we look at this a little bit closer, then we notice a couple differences. And I would say one apparent one is that the font is not the right one. Like this is Times New Roman, and not our regular font that we have on the website, and also not the one from the Figma file, right? This is something else. So this is something we got to look into. Then I think it's also pretty apparent that the background blurring is not working, because now you see that the text is sometimes, especially over here with Estonia, the text is like slashed through with a line in an unideal spot, right? Like this doesn't look really, really great. So the blur is gone. But on the upside, the gradient on the border, that still works. And that's pretty cool. From here, let's fix the first thing that we're going to fix is the naming stuff on Figma. And then we can re-export this, have it cleaned up a little bit, and then start to get to work. We're back in Figma here, and let's understand what's happening. So there's this ellipse 149 that is actually part of this group. So let's see how the groups are made. I think, like, I always just toggle stuff on and off. So there's this group that kind of holds all of the circles. That's fine, but I don't need that. I don't need that group. So this group now, that holds the green circles that are actually, so there's another one here. Oh, that is like that has a layer blur on it. Oh, so there's like a complete another circle that is just blurred up to be this background light effect. All right, that's cool. But then we can call it that. We can just call it center. Oh, let's go with dashes, blur BG. Right, then we have that. And we can actually stick that in the same group as this one and show that again, only that this has to go all the way in the end and in the behind it. So this is nice. And then we can call this center circle 1, and just repeat this here. Call this center circle 2, 3. Awesome. And we can grab the actual center that is not even part of the group and put it inside of the group. And then we can call that center circle 4. Maybe we can actually just call this center dot to give it like a clear distinguishation from the other 3 circles. Anyway, so let's not get sucked into this, but so we can call this group center circles. And so when I'm changing names over here, these I'm using dashes and lowercase naming here because these are going to become ID attributes on the individual SVG elements. So that's cool. We have that one. Now let's zoom out and see what we have here. So these groups, appear to be the individual locations. Okay. And now these dots are all of these. Let's stick them into a group because I think those are the decoration dots. Decoration dots. Let's hide them for a second. Yeah, decoration dots are gone. Cool. Those can go all the way to the top. In fact, now what else we have? Oh, here, I think here we have our location labels. Cool. Then let's call this Spain, South Africa, Germany, Estonia, and Dubai. Let's move the circles, the center circles up a little bit. So this is the Dubai dot. This is the South Africa dot. We could stick them together in a group, and that's also fine. But, you know, we also don't have to overnest stuff. Anyway, Estonia dot and Spain dot. So we have all of that stuff named already. That is very cool. Now, the thing that we have remaining here are the connection lines. We can stick them into a group and call them connection lines. And now the only thing I'm going to do is to remove spaces from here. Like, see this one, I already sort of named that one. You know, maybe we can try to use a feature in Figma to rename layers, which is pretty cool. So you can rename a whole bunch of layers at the same time. And yeah, we can now, I think we could match stuff. So you can see we're kind of searching for words in the existing layers, but we're going to do something else. We're just going to call this line dash and then give it a number. And then Figma is just going to give it like a number that counts up. Bang. So we have it, line 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That's awesome. We don't have spaces that break our ID attributes. That's very nice. So, and we're going to do the same here with the decoration dots. Just go in here and call this deco dot dash, give it a number. Oops, sorry. Going to go with the ascending number. Rename. Then we have that one done. Cool. Center circles, we named them manually. So, and here in the Dubai dot, let's zoom in on that one a little bit. So we have the center and we have this one and we have another one. Oh, that's apparently just like a blur background. Blur BG1. All right. And then we have the actual stroked circle that goes around the center dot. So since these are going to be IDs, we shouldn't just name it center. We should call this Dubai dot center and then call this Dubai dot blur. And we can call this Dubai dot circle. Awesome. Cool. So yeah, let's just do the same here. We'll actually can rename them all at once to this. And then we have that already. And then let's actually go there and see what we're doing. So this is the center. Did we call it center? We did call it center. Let's keep this open for a second. This is the circle. And This is the blur. Cool. So yeah, you can probably fast forward through this one. Yes. Perfect. So we have all of those. Then we have our city labels that we can inspect for a second to see what's going on. Are they all structured the same way? So they're all this auto layouted text. I think that we actually don't even need the group. Like we can ungroup this one and it will still look the same. Yeah. So let's do that. Let's lift the naming onto the auto layout. Let's group as well as any other group. So we don't have to make it too complicated. Oh, what did I do now? Okay. Oh, this is grouped twice. Amazing. Okay, don't need it. Can just put it here and ungroup it twice. Perfect. And then we have Dubai. Put it here also. Ungroup this one twice. Perfecto. So with that, we have our cleaned up Figma file. And now we can re-export this to SVG and see what happens. Okay, so we're gonna copy this thing again as an SVG and move back to our code editor, remove all of that stuff, paste it back in. Now we can see how Prettier is gonna reformat all of that stuff on save some. And now let's see if something changed in the browser. The graphic became a little bit smaller, and I think there's one foot gun I always forget. The graphic comes with fixed width and height attributes that we can just delete as long as we leave the view box in place. That is going to keep the aspect ratio just fine. And with this, the graphic scales up and down with our browser viewport, and that's cool. So up until now, we didn't really gain anything except for that we have pretty namings here now, right? Like here's all the work that we've been doing. These are connection lines. If we close all of our groups down, we can see essentially the layers that we had in Figma. And this, I think, makes it really easy to work with and to spot what's going on. So we can see, for example, that our cities have this cryptic filter thing going on. Filter 0, 1, 2, 3, B14. So this is stuff that nobody's going to understand. And through our grouping and layering, we now have a better overview of what's going on in the file. And now that we close down these groups, we can also see that there's a part of the SVG that's called defs, like definitions. That's stuff in SVG that are definitions that are not going to show up in the graphic on their own. So these are things that you can put into your SVG file to use later on. So if we look for this filter, for example, that's an ID that is the same, that this one has the same name, like this filter here, that is applied to this Dubai group. Let's look at the graphic and the code side by side. All right, so we do have this filter, but it doesn't really seem to me that that it's doing anything. So maybe let's try if we remove it. If we remove it from South Africa and hit save, then yeah, then nothing really changes. I mean, I can show you that the text is actually like that we're actually doing something here. So if I just delete this, then the word Africa disappears. So we are changing stuff on our file, only that these filters don't do anything. So that's a bit sad. And I did some research before, which also brought me to making this video. So as I mentioned before, we have the borders going on that have a gradient on them, and we have the background blur. And so the way that we want this background blur to work, let's look at the Figma file again, is that it really, like, the blur doesn't fade out here in some way. But it's really just like, it only blurs what's behind this box. And that, at least to my knowledge and to my research, can't really be done with SVG like that. So in CSS, we have a property that's called backdrop filter, and that does exactly this. But there's apparently no equivalent in SVG land. And interestingly enough, we have another case of this, only the exact opposite way around. And that is the gradient on the border here. That is something that SVG can do, but CSS can't. And now I know the CSS pros amongst you are going to scream, it's possible with a border image and set that to linear gradient. And we're going to actually, let's look at an example real quick, because I had that coded up before. I have this demo going on here where I just put together like a little word in a div. And what I did is that I applied a 2-pixel solid border to it. And then I also applied a border image that is essentially a linear gradient. And now the last thing I did, like, we want the borders to be rounded, right? So I'm rounding them here. And so if we hit save and look at this thing, then we can see exactly what the issue is with the native CSS support regarding gradient borders. And that is, they don't respect the corner radius, which is just very unfortunate. The usual best practice hack to get around this is to actually make 2 different elements, of which the one that is the furthest in the background has just like a regular linear gradient background. And then you place another element on top of it and just give it like as much padding as you want the border to be thick, and then it appears to have a border. But we can't do that in our case because we want the backdrop blur to shine through. And so we can't really have this full gradient going on in the background that we're just kind of covering up with this element. And so we have the situation that we actually have like 2 hacks. One works better in CSS and one works better in SVG. Now, let's see what we're going to do with that. But first, let's fix our font, because that's super annoying. So first thing, let's start easy. I'm going to go into the SVG and just give it a style tag, like a regular style tag. And then we can say text, because let's look at it. If we look at our Dubai, for example, then we have the SVG element that is actually called text. And I want this to apply to all of the texts. You could also add a class and call this text or whatever. But in our case, we'll get rid of the font family thing in the text element, select all of them, and get rid of them. Cool. So for the text, we can now see that it already dropped over to the right font. So that is very cool. So it's inheriting this, but there are some browsers who need the explicit definition. So we're going to say font family, and our font is called Reader Pro. I'm going to give it like a fallback of sans serif, because we really don't want this times to show up. And now we're also going to give it a font weight of the font that we're actually loading inside the website, and that is 500. So the font comes through a little bit thicker, which I think is a lot nicer like that already. Okay, let's tackle our background blur text issue thing. So to remind ourselves, we can't really have gradient borders with the radius in CSS, but we also can't really have the backdrop blur filter working in SVG. So what do we do? Like, I just wanted to show you like that even if we have an element that is just on top of this line, it won't blur the background in SVG. So like if we come here and make a new filter, I had this one tried out. So I'll just make like a filter, blur filter, and then we apply the Gaussian blur from SVG. And as the input, we take the entire source graphic, right? And then we give it like a 10 pixel blur. And then if we go on to the white background of the South Africa label, for example. So let's go here and let's make this super visible. Like let's make this like complete, there's no opacity here basically, and we just make this pink so we can see it, right? Like this is the element that we're talking about. So if we now apply this filter here, just like that, then it does blur, but the background, like the line in the background, doesn't really blur at all, right? Like this is just the way that SVG blurs work. So to do this, as far as I understand, is that you can have like super hacky solutions like blurring the entire background image so that the line blurs, and then use masks to unblur stuff. But this is going to be like a crazy mind-bending hack. So what I want to propose in our specific situation here is to, in fact, don't use any of all of this stuff at all. we'll just get rid of this entire element, and we're gonna do something else. We're gonna do something else, and that is we're gonna use something that is called foreign object in SVG. So with foreign object, you kind of make up a new box that allows for stuff that is not SVG in here. And in our case, that's going to be a span. That's going to say like an HTML span element that's going to say South Africa. So if we chuck this in here, then we can see we have our text right here, and it's in the middle of the SVG, but it's right, like our SVG ends here, but it's just, well, somewhere in the middle of this. Now, what I don't know yet that we can experiment together is if we're going to move the foreign object. So let's see what happens if we give this like regular coordinates, like, let's actually go back for a second and not delete all of the stuff that we had before. We don't need this. We're just gonna uncomment this. We're just gonna comment this out because we can still use the position here. So let's grab the position from this and let's try to bring back our foreign object, and let's just see what happens if we paste in our coordinates. So interesting. So this actually moves into the right place. That is very cool. And so now we can style this thing. And let's see how close we get to the original effect. So I'm using Tailwind here. For people watching this channel more often, you know, I'm a CSS enthusiast. For me, for most of the stuff, like in this case, Tailwind is just quicker. And I always, like, whenever something gets too crazy, I kind of break out and just write regular CSS for it. But in this case, I think we can be super quick about stuff like that. So I'm gonna, since we're in our SVG here, I'm gonna do not my regular spacings, but I'm gonna try to, you know, stick more to what we have in this graphic. So we wanna have like a, I don't know, 20%. Let's make it visible first. 50% background white. Then we want the backdrop blur. Let's make it like super small just to see if it's working, like a 3-pixel blur. So let's hit save. And so I think this is not yet doing what we want. Let's see if we actually have to move this in front, or like if we have to increase the blur. All right, so this is not yet doing anything useful. Let's try to, maybe we gotta position it differently. So let's maybe position this absolutely. Let's see what happens then. Well, okay, so now it's there, but like, what if we just move it somewhere in the middle? And now it's here, but it's also not blurring anything. So maybe we actually have to not use foreign object. That's a bit sad because I really wanted to make it possible like that. But so the other way, and that's I think also fine, is we grab our entire SVG and stick it into a figure element. Then we can apply like a class of relative here. This is my backup plan. Like I wanted to make it work with the foreign object, but so if it doesn't want to, if it doesn't let me, then we kind of, you know, then we're just going to do this. And that's also fine. So we have our South Africa going on here. And now we can see that it's on top, and we can also at least guess that it's blurring the background. Okay, so we have a couple of jobs now. We want to mimic the font size that's going on in this SVG. And so if we scale this down, you can see that the text in the image really stays relative to the full size of the image, but our text is staying bigger. We can emulate this, of course, with clamp. So clamp is this funny CSS function where you can basically give it like a value, but you can also at the same time specify a minimum and a maximum value. So in our case, I went to the amazing people from Utopia, FYI. They have this clamp calculator, and I entered 6 pixels as the minimum font size. Like I really don't want to go any smaller than this. And the max is like 16. And for the minimum width, I entered 320. And for the maximum width, this is our maximum container size in our site. So I'm using this. And then it spits out like this very complicated looking function, but it should resize our font is exactly to the size that we want it to. So let's see. We can actually remove this now since we're not going to have the text in here anymore. All right. Let's put this here. And then we're going to use the arbitrary values syntax in Tailwind. Remove all the spaces. That's always a little foot gun. Let's hit save. Aha. And so now South Africa is really, the text is really tiny, and see, like, it grows all the way up to how it's supposed to look. So that's pretty cool. Now let's fix the positioning. Since we're absolutely positioning stuff on top of the entire graphic, we can just use percentages to position this, and it will always stay in place as soon as the graphic grows bigger and smaller. So for the value from the left, we can just calculate this from the values that we had before in pixel. So when these were the values that we had on as pixel attributes on the SVG, on the text node and the SVG text node from before. So what we can do is we can take the full width of the SVG and the X position and get the percentage from the left side out of it. And we just do that by calculating 235. Well, let's be super precise. 0.723. I'm doing this off screen here, it's just a calculator. You can just divide it like that. And what you get out of that is this pretty number, which tells us that it's 22.38%. Awesome. So let's try to apply that. 22.39%. Let's actually comment this out. And that already looks very good. And then we can do the same thing for the top value. And that is going to be 261.09 by 1035, which comes out to this interesting value. So we have 24.8. You know, let's not be crazier than anything. From the top. Well, this is sadly not working out as I had expected, but maybe that's because the group got moved a little bit too. So in this case, we can probably just, try a little bit what we want here. 42%. We can, in fact, I think we can even go a little bit to the left, maybe like that. And now let's see how this behaves. So if we resize our viewport now, we can see that the text shrinks down and always stays in the place that we wanted it to stay, which is super cool. I think this is exactly what I wanted. We can also see that the line blurring is happening exactly the way that we wanted to. But so now we're approaching the border, the gradient border issue. And for this is not like disclaimer. This is not really the solution to gradients as borders on rounded elements. But in this case, the pragmatic solution to me is going to be the following. So first of all, let's apply the roundness. Rounded full. Now the element is rounded. Perfecto. And now let's give it a border. We can see the border. And now, since we have the border radius applied, we can, I'm just gonna set the border bottom value to 0. Border bottom, of course. And now what this does is that's just a specific thing that CSS does. As soon as you have a corner radius applied and you don't apply the border on one side, then it will sort of, fade over this border, which in this case is exactly what we want. So this is what we're going to do for our text elements here. And now we can actually drop down the background color a little bit like that, so we can see the blur coming through. I think in this case, we can even go with our regular blur values. So we use the small blur. And I think, let's check with Figma. I think this is very close to what we want as an effect here. Maybe we even want the medium blur. Let's just try. Or the regular blur. Oh, I think that's too much. Let's try the medium. Is that even bigger? Oh, that's even bigger. So let's go with the small one. That's cool. So we have the effect going on. The text is totally selectable, which I think is very nice. We're, I think, effect-wise, very close. Like we could even bump up the padding just a little bit on the y-axis to come even closer to our original design. And so now I think this is actually super close to what we want. And I'm kind of happy with this. So we can now replicate this for all of the other text nodes. So let's close down the connection line. Let's actually fold all of this and just dig into it again. So we have it here. So we know now that we can get rid of South Africa, Spain, Dubai, and Germany. So sorry to see you go, but you're coming back. No worries. So let's bring all of them back super quickly. Like, let's go one by one. Like, so we're gonna have 5 regions here. Let's have Dubai, South Africa, Spain, and then Germany last. And we had a 5th one, and that is Estonia, of course. That is Estonia. So now, and the only thing we got to figure out is the positioning. So which one was in which place? Spain was the upper left corner. Okay, let's start with that one. So that's probably not very far from the left. Right on. Maybe even 7, 8. 7.5%. And then from the top, probably only 20. Maybe 23. Very cool. So that's cool. Then the next one up is we have Spain, South Africa. Oh, we have Germany. That's the one with the actually the easy one, where we don't even need all of our fancy border hacks and stuff like that. We're just gonna go remove all of that, remove the backdrop blur, and actually go BG midnight and text white. Now that is pretty much in the center, so we can actually use the regular Tailwind provided classes here. Left, here. We're actually a little bit too far out. So let's go 40 maybe? A bit more. 43. 41. This is why you're usually not doing magic numbers. This is the absolute exception of the rule, since we're trying to fake an SVG image here. So we have Germany in place. Now let's look at Figma. We have Dubai and then Estonia. Right on. So let's move our code over here so we can see what's going on. let's do Dubai. We can actually probably, move that over to the right. So that's not half bad. 30 maybe. Oop, too much. 28, 27.75. Sure. And from the top, we'll have like 41%-ish. Awesome. And then we have Estonia last. We can also have that on the right, from the right. And that was actually not bad. Okay, 11. And from the top, I have like 20. 15. Too much. 16, 17. Awesome. And I know this was not the prettiest process of all times, but we do have our cities back, our regions back, and they stay in the right places. The text scales down as it was originally. It's machine readable, which is also super nice. And we have our blur effects going on, which is really what we wanted to do. Cool. So in the next episode, we'll look at the circles. So the ones that are here that also need the blur effect. We'll look at the bigger circles here, right? And we'll look at our parallax scrolling effect. All right. Thanks. See you in the next one. I hope you enjoyed this one. I'm going to probably release the second episode of this relatively quickly because I don't want to forget what I'm doing here. All right. Thanks. Bye.